Hello everyone, welcome to the Ahdurin region. I'm your host Ahdurin himself. Welcome to the beginning of a new series on this channel. It is the Pokemon Blue Rescue Team Starter Study Series. It's very exciting. I'm excited for it. The gameplay, the idea is pretty straightforward. We're going to go through Blue Rescue Team and truly find out which starter combination is the best. Now we could do proper mathematical analysis and going through and finding which enemies are good or bad against it, but rather than do that, let's actually go through the game with various different starters. Go through it. If you're a fan of J-Rose, you know about his gameplay series going through Generation 1 with every single Pokemon as a solo series. This is very much based on that, so a massive, massive shout out to J-Rose for inspiring this idea. As you can see here, the first starter combination we're going with, it's not one that I chose on purpose. It's one that I just took the quiz naturally and found out what it was. When I got Machop, I had to go with Treecko as my partner here because of Not a Scratch, a Pokemon Mystery Dungeon podcast that I run that is technically the sponsor if we want to count that as a sponsor. Let's go through the rules though. I'll go through the rules here going forward. There'll be a proper location where you can check out all the different rules as we go through Tiny Woods, Thunderwave Cave, the early parts that you kind of have an idea about. So the Blue Rescue Team Starter Study rule set. You can only use the two Pokemon that you have, your starter and your partner, in dungeons. No allies can be recruited unless they are mandatory, like Magnemite and Absol, and even if you do recruit them, they cannot join the party in dungeons. We're also going to have a goal of going through with minimum missions during free days. So we're going to have 2 missions, 3 missions, 2, 3, the minimum amount you need to progress to the next day. There's certain levels depending on where you are in the game. A lot of this is going to be based on the speedrun guide, which you can check out in the description down below. I was using this for this playthrough, and I'll be using this going forward to get a gist of minimum goals and other things like that. The idea as well, we got to make this as simplified and consistent as possible. So you can have no items when entering a dungeon, with one exception. You can take held items into a dungeon. I've got them here. I'll be honest, this was not originally a rule that I had in place. I was going to take off held items, but Blue Rescue Team, when you have the held item, it takes it away from your bag, and I didn't realize that initially, so we're just going to stick with having one held item into a dungeon at all times. There's a couple of exceptions as well. When entering Thunderwave Cave, you're going to get the items from Butterfree. Since this is unavoidable, this is an exception. And once we go on the run, if you know the gameplay, you know when that is, I'm allowed to bring up to 2 apples or big apples as the dungeons are longer. This is subject to change. I don't think this is necessary, but I've kept it in here just as a failsafe in case food and stamina become an issue. I cannot use TMs or HMs in this entire gameplay. Not only are they randomized because you can only find them in dungeons or if Kecleon is selling them, but also TMs and HMs vary based on the Pokemon, and I really want to see which Pokemon, as the Pokemon themselves, are best to go through this. So natural movesets here. Can't use Quicksaves, can't use Wondermail, and the final time is based on the in-game time after cutscenes. So when the cutscene is over, you log back in effectively to restart the adventure. The time code of how much time you spent on the game will be listed there. If we go through a dungeon over and over again and find that it's impossible, you can train via the dojo, but obviously this would add time, so as sort of a punishment for needing to train up more in terms of this starter combination. Technically speaking, these are no Revive Your Seed runs, but if I end up using them, those will be accounted for in the final time. So without further ado, let us officially begin this story that's currently in Tiny Wave Cave. So as you can see, because this is based on Not a Scratch, a Pokemon Mystery Dungeon TTRPG actual play podcast, which you can find on all sorts of podcast players, and will be on YouTube soon, which is very fun. I named the team Scratch, because why not? Machop is the starter, Treecko is the partner. An interesting combination, I'm going to tell you right now, looking at this going forward, this is going to be a tough combination to work with. A lot of the bosses are part flying type, which is bad for both of us, and a lot of the bosses can beat Treecko here. Not just with their flying type moves, but Skarmory with Peck, Moltres with any fire type move, Articuno with any ice type move. Groudon isn't exactly the easiest thing to work with, and of course Rayquaza, the big bad boss, is kind of just going to be dominant over us very easily. So it's something that we've got to keep in mind when going forward. The bosses are not built well for this team. This team is going to struggle with the bosses, but we have some advantages, some interesting factoids that could be useful going forward. Let's talk about Treecko first. So Treecko, being a grass type, is obviously going to take advantage of the grass type moves. Pound, Leer, and Absorb is the current moveset as of level 7, and eventually it's going to get really useful moves like Quick Attack and Screech, which could be very useful in the later game. Obviously, we won't be able to take full advantage unless we level up a lot to the real powerful moves like Giga Drain and Slam, but early part, Quick Attack is great for a partner, being able to attack people one space ahead, so it's a little bit of distance, and it can attack through the main ally. In this case, Treecko can attack through Machop, which is going to be very helpful going forward. Machop, meanwhile, extremely useful in the early part of the game. A lot of normal types exist, a lot of foes that don't have high defenses, and so Machop, with fighting type moves, with stab in that aspect as well, super effectiveness, extremely good in this early part of the game. It's got low kick and leer to start off with, focus energy, which is extremely helpful later on down the line, and eventually we'll get moves like Karate Chop and Revenge as we move further along. Again, can't take full advantage of Dynamic Punch or Cross Chop unless we level up a lot, which may or may not be in the plans, but since this is sort of a speed run in a way, despite the fact that I'm training right now, I know that later on levels are going to be hard to come by, so trying to get them a little bit early. Despite all that, though, I do think Machop is going to be helpful early on as well, because at least for Skarmory, the first big boss that we have to deal with, Machop at least does neutral damage, which could be definitely helpful going forward. We do a little bit of more training here in Thunderwave Cave. I'm just taking full advantage of the steps that we got, and then eventually save Magnemite and their friends as we continue on to the next big thing, Mount Steel. Before we go to Mount Steel, though, one thing we can do is go into Pokemon Square. Now, this is an area that has a lot of functions that ultimately aren't going to be very useful to us. Kecleon Shop is out of the question because we can't really buy items. I at least am not allowing it because we can't bring anything in. Kangaskhan's place is going to be a location where we just throw all our items in. Persian's Bank is a place where I will go to because I have a habit of going to Persian's Bank to store items. Storing Poke, sorry. But the big thing that we get to take advantage of is Gulpin's Link Shop. We link Leer and Pound. I link Leer and Low Kick. I don't believe, though, looking back on it, that Low Kick is actually affected by Leer, but I do it anyway because why not? It helps out my partner because linking moves is incredibly helpful. All Pokemon are able to do this, it's just a matter of movesets, and so I felt that Gulpin and allowing the linking of moves made things at least consistent across the line. Plus, and this is between you and me, it does make things a little bit easier when going through the harder dungeons to have multiple moves used at once. Made it a lot easier. I went through some missions, got some rewards that ultimately aren't going to be particularly helpful, and we continue on now in preparation for Mount Steel. Now, I'll be honest, Mount Steel as a dungeon in and of itself is actually really great for us. A lot of the Pokemon here are part Rock type, which makes it easy for Machop and Treecko to be able to dominate in that way. We have the Oranberry as well that's been held on to this entire time. We've got normal types like Zigzagoon. This is smooth sailing for basically the entirety of the dungeon, as long as we just make sure that things are properly done right. At this point, you can see I noticed that I had the held item, and I actually took the Oranberries off because I felt like that was breaking the rules a little bit. Later on, I bring held items back in. So this first little matchup here, at least, it doesn't really make an impact in the grand scheme of things, but it is something that I noted down as a potential rule that I might have broken, only to eventually just allow it again. As we enter into the 9th floor of Mount Steel, one thing is abundantly clear. Blue Rescue Team, not as favorable when it comes to power points since it doesn't restore when you're going to a boss battle. I'm actually in a situation here where I'm running really low, basically out of my Leer Low-Kick combination, so focus energy there. I could use it, I decide not to. I can use items if I pick them up in the dungeon, so I've got some Gravel Rocks, and this first dungeon, I'll be honest, Skarmory, not a particularly difficult boss. Ironically enough, when I was a kid, I struggled with Skarmory. I would win, but it would take a while. Through the power of linking moves, people having feet, I gotta mention it every single time, I promise. It's a thing that's gonna happen. I apologize, maybe. I don't know. Diglett have feet. That's a big thing. But yeah, I struggled with Skarmory a lot when I was a kid. Not in terms of beating it, but just it took a while. But, maybe as I have played through this game many, many times, it has gotten easier and easier to deal with. Is it something like that? Or maybe I just overcomplicated it when I was a kid. I don't know. We continue doing some more missions and getting some more rewards. We also meet up with a fun little organization here that seems to be insulting my house, which I find very disrespectful, but they decide to also steal our mail in the process, which, again, federal crime, if I'm not mistaken. They just waltzed away with it. Shout out Pelipper, of course, for coming in and delivering some more mail, but I'm pretty sure that's illegal, and making me wonder, if rescue teams exist here, who is the quote-unquote police force that takes the role of the government to arrest criminals? You know what, never mind. And then on top of that, on the very next day, as Caterpie shows up to ask for help about Metapod being lost in the woods, they come back to the scene of the crime to be like, hey, you know that job that you were just offered? How about I do it? And also get more in rewards than you were expecting, even though you didn't expect to give any reward. Why don't I do that? And I decide the reward, and, you guys work for us now, haha. I don't know the logic behind this, but it certainly doesn't make much sense. The result, of course, is us reaching Sinister Woods and having to go in through this dungeon. Now, this dungeon, unlike the other ones in the past, is a little bit more complicated. There are at least enemies that can be annoying for us to deal with. Not everybody is a pseudo-Wudo that can be knocked out easily, though I am taking every opportunity I can to get a little bit of health and experience. It is certainly not fun, especially when they're constantly being struggles like that one is. Eventually, though, we reach Sinister Woods Floor 13 for our next boss fight against Team Meanies. Now, this is much more complicated. They've got a Psychic type in Medicham, they've got a Ghost type in Gengar, they've got a Poison type in Ekans, all things this team does not do well with. We try Blast Seed, Thunder Punching us in return is what they do. I get cursed very quickly. We get rid of Medicham there. Ekans is a tank, though, and on top of the curses there, despite getting rid of Gengar, the Wrap there, the Oran Berry used by me. Will I? Will I? Will I? I do, which heals that up. Kyle can't move. I say Kyle because Kyle's the name of the Treecko right there, which I could probably use since the names are there. We continue going forward with attacks since our attacks don't do much. A Bite in return, a Poison Sting there. We're poisoned. We can only take one more hit, and there it is. Our first loss. Now you might be thinking, oh, okay, well, you lost to the big boss fight at the end. That's fine, though. You can just get back again, right? It's not that complicated. Besides, you guys are going to be level 11 and 12. You can get through there pretty easily. The problem is, as you may have noticed, is there's a Slackoth. And Slackoth, as you can tell from Explorers of Sky, the challenge I've done previously, is a very, very difficult Pokemon to deal with because it's already a very powerful Pokemon. Despite its true ability, it is still a pain to deal with. And despite our super effectiveness and our powerful moves, it's not enough. We gotta go try it again. Another feint in the books. Luckily, though, on this next attempt, we're able to get through and get things done properly. Another thing that I start to do at this point is start to use the gummies that I collect in the dungeons themselves. Now, once I leave the dungeon, you can't consume gummies. It's harder to do, and I don't think it offers any benefits if you can do it at all, because it's mainly a belly healing sort of thing, along with IQ skills. So I use them in the dungeon to help gain those IQ skills. This playthrough isn't going to have any frustration tactics, which is your general way to beat the game when speedrunning. So as a result, IQ skills, even though it is a little bit of a time usage there, it is still beneficial to help out your partner and your allies and yourself in the process by using those IQ skills. This time, we've got a little bit more moves, we've got a little bit more opportunity, a little bit more flexibility, and the focus energy to help with the crits while they move up towards us is definitely helpful. I'm doing a lot of analysis here trying to see what the best strategy is. We're going with a basically physical attack. Partners using Absorb to get the bonus points. I'm moving around to try to make sure that everybody can attack everybody, which is, at least when playing through, a lot better than one person being ganged up on by a bunch of others. Making sure also there's some flexibility on who we want to attack. I'm going for Ekans. Treecko goes for Gengar, gets cursed in response there, almost out of moves, especially if getting unlinked here would be very bad, because then that just makes things a little bit more costly to do, obviously. Try to throw an Oran Berry at Kyle, does not, for some reason, use it, instead dodges it. That's the unfortunate thing. For some reason, in this game, when you eat Oran Berry, it only works for you, it doesn't work for your partner. You've got to throw it at them or give it to them, and they don't seem to realize it, although right here they finally pick it up and then use that Oran Berry in response there. So now that we're both healed up, I'm still cursed, which is a little unfortunate. A Leer and Low Kick, though, with the curse activating Guts, allows for the knockout for Gengar. And so, it is another boss battle in the books. A couple of fainted, a couple of fails, but so far so good. This is something I'll also be keeping track of, how many times we faint in-game. It doesn't really matter because it doesn't impact the final score, but in terms of ranking everything to find out which one's the best or the worst, I think it might be a good additional thing to use in case one feels a little bit better but didn't have as many feints or vice versa. Something along those lines, it could help at least with that organizational process. So that is well down the line here. Speaking of down the line, we meet up with Jumpluff here, who's saying, hey, my friend Jumpluff, the other Jumpluff, is stuck between some rocks. Shiftry went about 10 years ago and still has not come back. Can you solve this mystery? And so we do, because, why not? Silent Chasm as a dungeon isn't too bad. There are some specific Pokemon you gotta watch out for. Yanma with Quick Attack, definitely not fun. Beetle with Fury Attack, definitely not fun. And then on top of it, there's a few Pokemon here that are starting to get a little bit more powerful. Farfetch can be a pain because it can beat both of us. The flying types, in particular, as I've mentioned previously, are what's really going to hurt us in this game. And the fact that Fury Attack on Farfetch'd also does a lot of damage because multi-hit moves are broken in this game isn't really helpful either. On the bright side, there is no boss battle, so as long as we can get through the dungeon without an issue, we should be fine. Oh yeah, and Dustox. Dustox is also a thing. Dustox, not there, but Dustox is also a thing. We're actually able to get through the dungeon pretty easily here. You can see we're already on the 8th floor. I'm level 13, Kyle's level 12, and we're able to get through without too much of a hassle here. I mean, you know, able to get through the dungeon here, find Jump Bluff, and more specifically, find Shiftry. I always love this scene where your partner is like, let's go, we gotta go find Shiftry, and it's like 5 spots away. It's not, it sounds like, oh, Shiftry's back there, let's go, and we go rushing over for a while. It's like, let's go, waddle, waddle, waddle. There's Shiftry. I always found that very funny. Also, Zapdos exists. Zapdos kidnapped Shiftry and is like, hey, I'm going to take him to the top of this tower. You want to fight me? And we say yes, eventually. Well, after a stomachache there. And so now our next boss is Zapdos. Zapdos is going to be a fun one. Of the 3 legendary birds, it is probably the one I am the least afraid of. Not only is it earlier in the game, but electric-type moves don't do much damage to either of us, as compared to Moltres' fire-type moves, does damage to both of us. Fire-type moves do damage to Treecko a lot. Ice-type moves do damage to Treecko a lot. Zapdos' electric moves don't. The flying is still going to suck, but at least we have something that we can take a little less damage from. So, as we prepare here, grabbing the missions for future days, I suppose, storing our Poke, storing our items, and all that sort of stuff, it is now time to face the first probably difficult boss battle in most playthroughs, Zapdos. Well, I will say we do one more thing before we go. As I spin around here, grab some Poke, I want to change the Link's moves that I have here. So I'm actually going to change Ralph's Link's move from Leer and Low Kick, and I'm going to switch that up to Leer and Karate Chop. Not only will this actually have a direct effect on the move that I use after Leer, but it's also going to be beneficial for me to have Low Kick as its own separate thing. It's a niche option for heavier Pokemon, or the standard Leer Karate Chop for most enemies that I'll have to worry about. Here we are, Mount Thunder, the probable first place that I generally think of when I think of things getting more complicated. Because of course there are electric types here that's always fun to deal with. We're not too worried about electric types. As a Mudkip player though, it is something to worry about. More importantly though, those poison pointing Nidorinos, all of that complicated stuff. The Beedrills. Oh, the Beedrills. And the fact that they seem to be showing up all over the place right now. It's not fun. But we continue forward, eventually trying to reach the top of Mount Thunder, where for the first time actually in this dungeon, we'll start to see those multi-stage things where you can save in between. Those will be helpful, especially considering the sheer amount of complications that can occur in future dungeons. If you know, you know. As you go further into the dungeon, though, the more complicated Pokemon start to show up. Stantler, of course, isn't too big a deal. Manectric can be a little complicated to deal with, especially if you don't have the right movesets or strategy in place. The Growlithe, however, for our team, are not good. And the fact that there's so many of them showing up makes it not good easier. Not easier. It's definitely not easier. Despite the fact that we're able to handle them so far, the burn there really sucks. Because not only are moves going to be weaker on Kyle, it's also going to be a little bit more complicated to continue staying healthy. Because while moving around is able to withstand burns, the burn damage doesn't outweigh the movement damage. The fact that so many enemies happen to be following us here, including an Ampharos, multiple Growlithe, which can easily knock out Treecko, it's ultimately going to lead into a disaster. The fact that there are multiple Growlithe as well, the burn damage there, we don't have any more healing items. I'm just trying to use as much as we can. The roar damage isn't fun either. I try to step back, low kick, a little bit more. The miss there, though, is critical, and we take the loss. On the 10th floor here, by the way, on our second run-through of the dungeon, I find this Manectric, and I don't really want to talk about that one. That one's just bad math on my end. On our next run through, though, we are able to successfully get to the top of Mount Thunder, and the great thing about the save point at the peak is that it resets your power points, meaning that we can go into this boss battle without any worries of our power points being really, really low. So, Zapdos is here. Zapdos is also fun because it's the only battle where your partner actually rushes up on the opponent, making it that much more difficult to have them come towards us. I use the focus energy and force my partner to walk away, take another step back to bring them back, and now we're in a good situation. I've got the focus energy, I've got a couple of gravel rocks, power band, special band on the partner as well, and so we're hoping that this would work. Oh gosh, this is going to be tough, isn't it? Yep, sure enough, my worst fears are reality. One bad flying type move and our entire team is getting cooked. So we gotta kind of hope that Zapdos doesn't actually use a flying type move. So, how does that work? Strategy starts off the same. We get Treecko to move back a step, Zapdos comes up at us while we use Focus Energy, we take a step back and make things good. Now, we've got double Power Bands this time, since that's going to be a little bit more effective, but we still take Peck damage that knocks us out. Yeah, you understand the strategy here, it's just a bad strategy. We gotta hope that random luck has Zapdos not go for Peck, and instead go for any other move, basically, I think would theoretically work here, except Agility. Agility would actually suck. So really, it's a 50-50 shot of immediate failure, postponed failure, or success. Let's see how our next attempt goes. That's right, despite how that ending scene previously left off, we did survive that and moved on to this fight here. And now it's attempt number 3, I believe. Let's see if this can work a little bit better. Strategy starts off the same. I go for a Gravel Rock instead of a Focus Energy. Does that make a difference? I don't know, but we're going to try it out for sure. Blast Seed here, get some additional chip damage off. There's a regular attack. That's good. We can continue this going here. We're dropping their defenses more and more. A Thunder Wave misses, very nice. Karate Chop does a lot of damage. The Pound does a big amount of damage. I get paralyzed here, which isn't bad because I can still throw items. So I use the one remaining Gravel Rock there, and we get the knockout we needed. Throwing items are incredibly helpful. They're very common as well, so it feels safe to use them. On top of that, I don't have any rule about not using items you find in the dungeon. It's just you can't bring anything in, which is incredibly helpful for this specific case and future battles as well, because trust me, if this was a no items run, I'd still be recording this playthrough. So, now we move on to the next location. No boss battle there, but the Hill of the Ancients at the end of the Great Canyon. We go that way. As we enter into the Great Canyon, I actually want to talk about something very unrelated to all of this, but an important note that I learned about from a commenter the other day. I say the other day, it was actually a little bit ago. Those gravel rocks that I refer to, the throwing items that do 20 damage and are incredibly helpful in this game, and basically, especially the first 2 games in particular, it's extremely helpful and kind of how I won a lot of my challenge. Yeah, those aren't called gravel rocks. Those are called Graveler rocks, like Graveler the Pokemon. Which makes sense. I mean, most of the other items that are throwables, especially in the future games, are named after Pokemon, right? There's the various different types of like courseless twigs or sticks, I forget how exactly they are, and other throwable items that are named after Pokemon. So it makes sense that these are named Graveler rocks, like Geopebbles are named after Geodude. So you have obviously the better version of it being Graveler. I just never noticed that, despite it being, what, a decade and a half since this game came out, and so yeah, that was a fun little detail. Shout out to that specific commenter for remembering it. I apologize if I don't remember your name, but it was a very, very interesting detail that I did not know, and I wanted to share it with all of you before I say I will still be referring to them as gravel rocks, because that's, despite it being wrong, my pronunciation. If you read the About section of this channel, you know I specialize in saying Pokemon names wrong. We'll just expand that to items too, why not? We reach the Hill of the Ancients, where Xatu is staring to the sun. Folks at home, do not try this at home because it is not a good strategy. Despite Xatu saying this can help them predict the future, it's not exactly ideal here. We get a little bit of information about how our destiny is doomed and all that sort of stuff. Gengar is in the background. If you've seen this game, you know how it works. There's also a lot of plot-related stuff here that isn't actually related to the story, so let's do a little montage. So, let's begin that here. First off, Xatu talks about how the unthinkable is happening in the universe. Gengar is in the background right now. We hear about this thing called the Ninetales legend that sounds a lot like what could theoretically fill in as my human life, because there's a Gardevoir, and I've seen a Gardevoir, and there's a human, and I used to be a human, and now they were transformed into a Pokemon. The world goes boom when they transform into a Pokemon. I have a dream that's presumably about said Gardevoir, because it looks like that Gardevoir is the Gardevoir that knew who I was, and that's not great for the morality clause that's inside me right now. According to Gengar, at least, the Ninetales rumor is true, and that Pokemon used to be a human, and that human and Pokemon Ninetales legend look like it's reality. The world's gonna get a big problematic situation. Gengar says, hey, you know what? We should get rid of that human permanently, which is us, apparently, according to Gengar. Apparently, because of our lack of response, that's an admission of guilt, and Lombre tries attacking us here. So that's fun. Team ACT shows up and disguises themselves as enemies while pretending to actually be the enemies. They're also allies, saying, hey, go find the truth, leave real quick. Oh no, I tried, but I failed. They just ran away. That's my logic. That's how I feel like Alakazam went back and was like, guys, they're not at home. I think they left. Shucks. All of the friends we made along the way, the Diglett, the Caterpie, the Metapod, the Jumpluff, the other Jumpluff, Pelipper. I'm assuming Dugtrio is just underground right now and doesn't want to show themselves. All the allies we made along the way help us, and we go through various different locations of chaos as we seek out the truth. Our first dungeon from here, Lapis Cave. No boss fight at the end of this, but we are getting chased by this group who has seemingly caught up to us in the 3-hour difference that we got. And so we go through Lapis Cave, not a very complicated dungeon. I'll be honest, Lapis Cave I've always found being one of the easier dungeons in the game, especially compared to where you are level-wise. It always seems really easy there. There's a little glitch that happened. I switched the screens by accident. And we continue forward all the same as we get through Lapis Cave rather quickly, I'll be honest. And without any trouble, we exit Lapis Cave only to move on to our next destination, the big volcano, Mount Blaze. What I consider to be the second hardest dungeon in the game based on where you are. Yeah, I think that would be roughly it. This is the most complicated dungeon for me specifically. And so, maybe third, actually. And so we go to Mount Blaze. Now you see the Kangaskhan rock there. That's incredibly useful because it allows this challenge to exist the way that it does. I can still store all the items I've got without needing to worry about breaking that rule in the process. Okay, doesn't really matter whether I have it or not. And so from here we go, as we're speedrunning through this, through Mount Blaze. Mount Blaze, as you can probably tell by the fact that we have a Treecko on our team, is a little complicated to deal with. And the big boss at the end is probably the worst of the big birds that are out there, because unlike Zapdos, who doesn't have a super effective move on us, and unlike Articuno, who I can deal neutral damage to, Moltres does not have that same issue. Moltres can deal super effective damage to both of us. It can deal super effective damage with its other type to Kyle, and neither of us can deal neutral or super effective damage to it beyond our normal type moves. Meaning that, to me at least, Moltres is probably the hardest boss to deal with, especially of the 3 birds. Also, fainting doesn't help here, as we do right there, which makes this dungeon even more complicated. Our levels are not helping out here. Despite the fact that we did those extra training montages in the earlier dungeons, we still got to make sure we prepare properly for this, because we can easily get knocked out by one false ember, one peck by a Pidgeotto. Anything wrong could happen. Surprisingly though, for both you and me probably, after that initial fainting, we get through the dungeon without any issue and reach the peak with that big bad boss, Moltres. Now, like I said, Moltres, coming into this, the worst of the 3 legendary birds to deal with. Because the fire type can beat Treecko, the flying type beats both of us, and we don't have super effective moves, especially stab super effective moves, on it. We've got a couple of gravel rocks in the background. Our strategy, lower defense, use our power band, take full advantage of the attacking, focus energy, and let's get going. Our strategy is simple. I go Leer Karate Chop, partner goes Leer Pound. We cross our fingers. They don't do flying moves. Regular attack the first time. We do some big damage. Missed. I lose my focus energy, but I'm just going to keep attacking here. A little bit more of a regular attack there. Karate Chop, the Pound. I'm in the red health, but so far so good. Another Leer Karate Chop, and we knock out Moltres on the first try. The one boss that I was most afraid of in this entire game, besides, of course, Rayquaza being the end boss, that's always the hardest one. But of the ones that were planned there, this was one that I thought was going to be really hard, and we won on the first try. Maybe we are good. I will say stab fighting type moves are pretty damageful. Because that's a word. The critical hit boost that you can get from focus energy for the first couple of turns helps stack up damage. The lowering of the defenses is really helpful as well. Maybe this is actually going to work out. He says, knowing full well what's about to happen. Next up on the list, Frosty Forest. As a dungeon, it's not too bad. While a lot of the Pokemon there can beat Treecko, I can beat a lot of those Pokemon, the ice types in particular. And of course, the normal types like Furret and Ditto that are here aren't exactly the most complicated to deal with, especially as a fighting type, so it's more of a PowerPoint managing game than anything. Actually speaking, our first time going through, we go through it without any issues whatsoever, no faintings in the dungeon, and we reach the final floor of the Frosty Grotto, where of course, there is the shining bird, the ice bird, the one that will cause a nice little flash of light right here. It is Articuno. Articuno can be complicated. Powder Snow, a room-dealing move, Ice type, meaning that if it uses it at any point, it will probably knock out our partner and potentially knock out us as a result. Agility is not useful as well because now it gets multiple moves per turn. We start doing some damage here. A Leer Pound, a Leer Karate Chop. The Mist is a little helpful as well. More Karate Chop, critical hit damage there. Losing our focus energy though. We're trying to get this done. Agility some more, but the Powder Snow, an instant knockout. You can see right there, it's 60 points of damage on me, meaning that on the partner, it will absolutely knock it out even without the super effectiveness. So that's a little bit of PowerPoint management that we have to deal with, especially going through the dungeon. Now no longer the case in the grotto, but we need to be very, very careful about the Powder Snow. It's a little bit of luck that's involved there. Can we do it? Do we have to resort to just crossing our fingers that Powder Snow doesn't work? The agility is not helpful either. Let's try attempt number 2. An interesting thing this time, I picked up a Reviver Seed in the dungeon. Now these are allowed. I'll note it down, even though it doesn't really matter. The Reviver Seed note that I mentioned earlier in the episode is about Reviver Seeds that are used during the match, like bringing them into the dungeon. If you find one in the dungeon, I feel like that's fair game. Maybe that'll be what we need. Problem is, one Reviver Seed doesn't help too much, especially if a Powder Snow comes in and wipes us both off the map. But we'll try it out. Let's see what we can do with the Reviver Seed. We got something in the back pocket there. First off, making sure that we've got the move set up, focus energy, Articuno jumps down at us, we do some big damage there, getting healing nearly 100. A attack is definitely nice, 134 with the crit, and the Powder Snow knocks me out, but partner takes a whole bunch of damage. Meaning, either we get lucky and find 2 Reviver Seeds on the same technically 4 floors between now and fighting Articuno, or we need to hope for no Powder Snow. A little bit of luck-based strategy here. Can we do it? Now, unlike last time, no Reviver Seeds. We're just walking in with a couple of Oran Berries and crossing our fingers for luck. Can we get it done, though, this time? It's a question to keep in mind as Articuno comes back for another attempt at us. Now, strategy is the same. This is the best strategy because it does a lot of damage early on, doing the big damage there with the Cross Chop. Powder Snow knocks out. You know what actually might be best? What if we just did a little montage of feints going forward, because there are a couple of them. So here's one I get because I'm greedy trying to get experience points, and instead it knocks me out with a horn attack. There's a gust that activated right there. How about this one? This one's a fun one in the middle of the fight where Articuno goes agility followed by Powder Snow. At this point, I was starting to realize the Leer wasn't actually doing defense drops because of Mist, and I think that made me so despondent that I decided to just see what would happen if we fainted, to see if any of our moves is better. Maybe we could go through the dungeon one more time. The problem is, held items are gone. Gotta keep those. Now, obviously this is winnable. The worst case scenario is we would train up a bunch. Eventually we had to succeed, right? Well, let's find out how exactly that would work, because yes, we do eventually succeed. Let's talk about it. First off, though, the strategy is pretty straightforward. I've gotten to the point where I've just memorized it. I'm prepared in advance at this point, so I just focus energy, let them step up. Same strategy. We drop the defenses, get as much defense drop as we can before they go for Mist. An A attack there by Articuno, very helpful. Another A attack, extremely helpful. We can keep lowering defenses, we can keep getting critical hit damage, and actually, it makes it that much easier. Really, turning out, looking back on it, it wasn't necessarily Powder Snow that I had to worry about. It was when Articuno used Mist. Because once it did, those defense drops would no longer happen. Meaning that we can't lower your defenses, we're just going based off of our damage. If we could keep our focus energy up a turn or 2 extra than normal, that's helpful as well. But ultimately, it was Mist that was really causing us issues because we could only do so much defense dropping before it no longer took effect. Absol joins our team as a result of that victory, and we continue forward now to the final dungeon of our final expedition here, as Gardevoir will soon explain in a little scene that happens at this point. Ninetales is at the top of Mount Freeze. If we can get there, and there are no boss fights in this dungeon, if we can get to the top, the truth will be revealed, and we can finally go home away from this icy town that we're in. So, let's climb up Mount Freeze. Now, like I said, Mount Freeze is a dungeon in particular with a lot of Pokemon that we can deal with. We can do a lot of damage to them. The dragon types like Shelgon are a little complicated, but ultimately, it's not that big of a deal. We're not going to faint. Okay, so maybe we will faint a couple of times, like that time there. But, Mount Freeze, it's an easier dungeon to work with. Like I said, easier dungeon to work with. Only the one feint that probably was avoidable if I'd done better math. Do a little gummy management here, aka using them. Picked up a Reviver Seed in the middle, which is always fun, but ultimately not going to be beneficial. As we reach the summit, finally meeting up with Team ACT. We have the world's greatest fight, which I think is one of the things that the DX games, the future remaking of these games, did pretty well. I remember I haven't played through the game personally, but I do know that cutscene where they actually have like proper fight animations a little bit. It's definitely more impactful than this, which I find very fun. Also, we're not the human from the legend, which is great. We can go back home and relax and rub it in Gengar's face, which is kind of the goal. And sure enough, some days later, I don't know how long it would take actually, Medicham informs Gengar and the squad that, hey, we're back. Reality has been set in. We aren't the human from the legend. And let's get some proof as well. Here comes the proof coming from the sky as our boy, our friend, Pelipper, after everybody else decides just to flat out ignore what Gengar is talking about, Pelipper is going to show up with a bunch of newsletters and proof and everything that makes things so much easier. So we can rest a little bit and relax while Team ACT deals with that whole Magma Cavern Gengar stuff. You guys have never heard of Magma Cavern before, right? It's not like it's a extremely long and complicated dungeon that's got 20 plus floors or anything like that. No. That's just something you hear about off the side. It's like Eastern Forest, I think, in Explorers of Time, Darkness, and Sky. It's just some dungeon that exists that you'll never actually visit. Right? Anyway, while Team ACT deals with Magma Cavern, we do what is the equivalent to shouting out J-Rose again, the equivalent of the Erica Gym, for me at least. Uproar Forest, a thing that I always forget exists, but it is mandatory. It does need to be done. And unlike Erica's Gym, it needs to be done right now. So, let's go ahead and do it. Let's go through Uproar Forest. Now, the big thing to note about Uproar Forest, A, it's not that complicated. Grass types are a little bit annoying for us to deal with. Seismic Toss here is an interesting move. I actually replaced Low Kick with this. Later on down the line, though, because Seismic Toss is based on level, Low Kick does a lot more damage. I figured this out relatively quickly, and eventually, later on down the line, I will replace Low Kick back with this. I'll go to Gulpin's place to relearn Low Kick. The Seismic Toss, definitely not worth it compared to Low Kick, especially because we're probably not reaching the point where Seismic Toss is going to do more damage than Low Kick. So we eventually switched that back. But big thing going through here, and the big thing, the big thing, when it comes to speed runs like this, is the 9th floor. And I'll talk about that when we get there. Uproar Forest, however, introduces one new thing that we all enjoy so much right here, monster houses. This one at least isn't too bad in the grand scheme of things, but monster houses are now a thing that we have to worry about. Oh, joy. Because everybody... leave in the comment section how much you love monster houses. Be as honest as you'd like. My only request, keep it PG, because we know monster houses are fun. Yeah, they're great. They're just exactly what you want in Pokemon complicated run-throughs. So here we are on the 9th floor. Now we found the stairs, but I'm not walking towards them because of what's on the 9th floor. Now, in this game that you may or may not, I would hope that you would know about it, those chestnuts that I just picked up are extremely important. They can only be found on the 9th floor, and you need 2 of them in conjunction with the reward chestnut that you'll get a little bit later. You'll need 2 plus that extra 1 to be able to complete the building of your house. Now, on this 9th floor, it's a very high probability that you'll get 1. There's a very small probability you'll get 2. And you notice there, Mankey picked up a second chestnut. This helps speedruns tremendously. Now, I'm not a speedrun expert, but this is certainly a little bit, as we go through this boss fight here, a little bit of things that I touched on and learned about while going through these challenges. 2 chestnuts on the floor, very low odds, but if you can get that second chestnut, if you get lucky enough to find that the second chestnut is on that floor, it decreases your speedrun by multiple minutes, if not more than that. So, we got very lucky on this one. I don't know why. I don't know if it's just good vibes for the fact that we're starting the series off, but it is definitely helpful because it means I don't have to go through Uproar Forest an entire time again just to reach the 9th floor to get another chestnut. So those 2 I picked up on top of the 3rd one here means we can just go through and cut through all the building sequences, jump straight to the final house. And eventually we finish our rescue team base. It looks like us I can't tell if we're crying or cheering, but it's a very fun house nevertheless. I don't really know a lot of the other designs of the houses. Like I say, I played with Mudkip a lot when I played through these games, so it's been through all of these challenges that I've learned more about the various different team designs. I could go through the game's code or look up like a video talking about it, but it'd be fun to experience all of them as we do here. And look at that. Look at that beautiful house there. On top of this, we got to do some more missions as well before the next plot point begins. This point right here, by the way, before I start those missions, is where I relearn Low Kick and get rid of Seismic Toss. Like I said, Seismic Toss not going to be helpful until we reach really high levels, and we're not going to reach really high levels based on the design of this challenge. So instead, just going to bring back the Low Kick, go back to the old setup. We jump into this setup here where a bunch of rescue teams are being brought together by Shiftry, who's talking about, hey, Alakazam's team is underground to try to fight Groudon, but nobody has heard from them, and they may be stuck there. Ooh, it's a problem. And so, a special team force is selected here. We think about it, Lombre stops us for some reason. I don't know why, we've clearly proven ourselves. But the team is selected. First off, Blastoise, and then Octillery, and finally, Golem, right over there. Here's the thing that I just noticed while going through this game for the 17 millionth time. This team is not exactly good for Groudon. Yes, it is a ground-type Pokemon, but Groudon's ability Drought makes water-type moves lose effectiveness, meaning that Blastoise and Octillery aren't going to be very helpful, and that Groudon's a ground-type against a Golem. Like, this is not exactly the best-built team, which would probably explain what happens tomorrow. Yeah, so we wake up the next day with another earthquake happening. This has been happening a lot. Kyle breaks into our house, which isn't a normal thing that happens. The very next day, because of how we did the missions, they come back fainted. Not only could they not get to Groudon, they couldn't even go through the dungeon fully. Gengar comes in to spew some negative connotations and comments and all that sort of stuff. Kyle, though not really a talker, speaks up and is like, hey, how about no? And we go through the dungeon, find Alakazam's team. Come on, they've helped all of us out. Why can't we help them out? And so a little bit of motivation. Team Scratch has got a little bit of a name brand. And together, we decide to go into Magma Cavern the next day to finally, maybe, potentially, solve this whole earthquake issue that's been happening. Is it Groudon that's causing it? The world's destruction? Let's just try to go solve it one step at a time. First step, Alakazam's team needs to be saved. We got to go beat up Groudon in the process. Easy day. It's a typical Tuesday. Now, Magma Cavern, as you can probably tell by the name Magma Cavern, is full of magma-related Pokemon, like fire types, ground types, and rock types, and poison types, I guess, just to, cause more of an issue. And so, you'll see a lot of opportunities for me to have struggles. For example, Nidoqueen, not very good for this team in particular because it's a poison type, meaning it resists our moves. It's a poison type, meaning it can beat up Kyle. And on top of all of that, this poison is just going to make things significantly more complicated. Here's the first example of one of many, many feints I have, because poison in this generation deals 4 points of damage, meaning that it can easily whittle me down and knock us out. In fact, just to save you guys the trouble, here is now a montage of feinted situations that happened in Magma Cavern. Yep, that last one was kind of rough. That poison sting, ooh, that's not very good either. Hey, where'd the montage go? Why is this normal gameplay? Oh, you mean I didn't faint 20 times in this particular challenge like I have in other challenges, and this one actually worked out remarkably well? Huh, alright, I'm down with that. Speaking of things I'm very, very down with, this is something that I found very, very useful. It's not the throwing items that I'm using here, it's that item in the top right corner. So after we get rid of this Nidoking, a scope lens. Hold item that boosts the critical hit ratio for attacks and other items. Fascinating. It's an item I pick up here, and something that will be helpful later on down the line. I just wanted to mention that real quick before we continue with this remarkably good gameplay, I'll be honest. That's right, somehow, some way, despite the fact that this is a very bad dungeon for us, and despite the fact that Onix and Steelix, despite type matchups, are incredibly difficult to deal with because they are just tanky as all heck. You saw that Absorb did 5 damage to that Steelix. Despite all that, we're actually in a good spot right now. We do a little bit of item and move management over here before we prepare for the big one, the Groudon fight. Now, the second floor is actually not even a floor, it's just a plot location. Despite the fact that technically speaking, this is a floor. If you were to go through the dungeon again, you would just walk from one side to the other, no enemies involved. I'm not sure why they did it like that. They could have just kept it a like dungeon, but maybe they wanted to keep the 3-floor sort of theme that's been going on for a while. Anyway, Alakazam gets beat right there, meaning that Groudon is up next. Now, I'll be honest, this first fight for Groudon is simply just a test run. I want to see how things would work, because it's not hard to get back here. It's just one floor fighting. So, first things first here, after doing a little bit of management from this side, throwing a Silver Spike. It misses. And then after throwing mine back, it does 5 damage. They throw it. It does 25. Gravel Rocks are easily the method to go going forward. A little bit of damage being dealt here. Again, it's a similar sort of strategy we've been adopting this entire time. I go for low kick because that did 24 damage. The Leer Karate Chop does much more, meaning that that's the method to be going forward with. We've got a partner using Leer and Pound as well, because Absorb is not going to do a lot of damage. We get knocked out with the Slash there. But again, a sort of test run. This is fantastic placement, I'll be honest. And I actually equipped the Scope Lens onto Kyle, because I think maybe Kyle having critical hit advantages as well could be helpful, especially if I continue to go for the Karate Chop method that I've used in the past. Boosting critical hits, maybe doing a Focus Energy, depending on whether or not that could be useful. A couple of ideas in my head, a lot of it based on having that constant chance of a critical hit doing a lot of damage. So, attempt number 2 with Groudon, we've got a better strategy. We throw the Gravel Rocks, we set up the Focus Energy, maybe, depending on if it's necessary or not. Maybe we do the extra chip damage as well. But ultimately, we've got an idea in place. And so, we're going to start it off by throwing those Gravel Rocks. We're going to do the damage that we can. Focus Energy here to make sure, because it's always going to work. And now we get those crits, doing as much damage as we can, lowering defenses. Ancient Power doesn't do a lot of damage to us. Despite us losing our critical hits, Mud Shot there on Treecko doesn't do a lot of damage. It's still keeping us alive here, and we get the knockout. Again, our strategy is the same. Their strategy changes a little bit. And we get Groudon down, meaning that there is only one location left, one fight left, one big boss left. Of course, it is the most complicated one, but we are very, very close to our end goal here. The next day, with the power of the Teleport Gem, we jump up from the ground to the sky as we zoom up to Sky Tower. In the clouds, easily the most complicated dungeon in the game, in my opinion. Regardless of level, I think this is the toughest one. That Mount Blaze one is tough depending on who you are. I think it's like top 3 in my opinion. If I had to rank them, based on how these challenges have been going so far, just historically, I think it goes Sky Tower, Magma Cavern, then Mount Blaze for some reason. I always seem to struggle there. But Sky Tower is complicated because of these guys. Ghost-type Pokemon can cut through the walls, and when they're in the wall, you can't attack them. That, on top of the fact that we don't really have great moves for Shuppet, Duskull, and the like. Along with that, the fact that they can use moves like Nightshade, which is set damage, that is a sizable amount of damage, means a Sky Tower is going to be tough. Now, I was joking about the montage previously. It was only a couple of attempts in Magma Cavern. This time, though, I'm actually going to show you a legitimate montage of fights right here. So, let me show you that starting now. We'll add in quick little summary. So, Floor 6 is a monster house. Despite our efforts, you can understand how this one, with all the ghost types, the Lunatone, the at any point fortresses that could literally use explosion or self-destruct to just detonate and cause massive chaos. You can understand how this one led to a complicated situation, the fainting and all that. This specific moment here is what happens when Nightshade and Spite come together to make a Shuppet, a very, very angry ghost-type Pokemon. This specific moment here is when 2 Duskull come together to decide to cause some chaos, I suppose. In my headcanon for this particular challenge, these 2 are just basically the Dusknoir in the past that are causing, annoyances. This specific one was very sad because it was on the 21st floor, and it's a monster house with Aerodactyls and silver winging Venomoth, I think that's how you can theoretically pronounce it, and Scizors, and there's that Dusclops, which has pressure, meaning that even if we got through, it'd be very tough to continue getting through the dungeon, even though there's only a couple floors left because of the, limited power points and all that. And the speed boosts activate to help all the allies, meaning that now they can just charge at us. They're ×4 speed, just using all of them. Yeah, you know what happens here. In fact, it gets to the point where I decide, you know what, enough's enough. We're going through this. Clearly, it's not being very impactful. We could sneak our way through, but even if we do, we're probably not going to have much of a shot in that higher section of Sky Tower. So let's do a little bit of training. Now, yes, this does add time, right? That's the quote-unquote punishment for, the punishment's a strong word. That's the cost-benefit analysis that we're doing there. An easier chance of going through the dungeon in exchange for a couple of minutes to spend training up most of the way, especially the way that I play this game, and I'm not using frustration and I'm under-leveled as is, means that we probably should train up a little bit. I'm doing minimum missions as well, meaning it takes longer. And so I go through a couple of different dungeons. I go through the dragon one a lot, and went through the psychic one and a couple of other ones as well, you can see during this little montage section here, meaning that we're slightly higher leveled going into Sky Tower now as opposed to previously. Will that help us out? Let's find out. Well, I'll tell you at the very least, it's not immediately successful because, of course, of Silver Winging Venomoth right there. So, despite the spike and the quick damage there, it's not immediately successful. But we are getting closer. We're on floor 24 now, meaning it's that much more heartbreaking. And yes, of course, whenever there's multiple Shuppets that can go in Nightshade and Screech and do massive amounts of damage just by an A attack and a curse like that, it's a little harder. I eventually, actually, will talk about this when it gets to it. That right there, that poison gas, is eventually going to be what knocks us out on this floor. But I wanted to show this floor off just as a little aside and a little bit of a humorous sort of situation here. We're continuing through. I'm trying to find the stairs because, of course, we have a time limit here. I can't have Treecko going through and getting knocked out at any point. But have you ever seen a specific room that screams Monster House, like that one right there? Like, I found it very funny when going through, and I just saw, like, the multiple TMs and the Poke. Like, you can see it there, and I'm like, I don't want to walk in there, because even if the stairs are there, if the stairs are there, we're doomed because of monster houses. And, I don't feel like it's a monster house situation that I want to walk into, especially if this is going to happen anyway. On this specific run-through, I actually found X-ray specs, which was really helpful to avoid enemies I didn't want to fight. The problem is when you generate into a floor that has enemies you don't want to fight, specifically these two, which is probably one of, if not the worst combination of enemies you could probably see on this dungeon, because Aerodactyl is just extremely powerful and Venomoth can spread damage at any point. It kind of causes some slight issues there. But eventually, and I do mean eventually we get through. Now, you might be wondering, oh no, he's showing us another fainted situation. No, I'm not. This is an interesting situation. You might have noticed 2 power bands are on each of us. That right there, though, is another scope lens, meaning that we can take advantage of that on either of us, frankly, as we waltz into the next stairs. And this run-through, because it's the successful one, despite how everything looks, we actually do get through. That's right, finally, after beating this Aerodactyl, we finish floor 25 and get to the save point, meaning the scope lens is ours. We can use that going forward. Again, I mentioned this, probably because I'll use it going forward. Now the only thing left is reaching the top of Sky Tower, getting through, leveling up in the process. You can see right now, level 26 and 24 respectively, decent levels, and I think we might actually level up once more when we go through to the very top. It's definitely helpful gaining the experience that we can as we fight Rayquaza, our final boss of this challenge. It helps as well that we're getting some pretty good luck with stairs too, Metagross being not the worst thing in the world. And now that we've reached this point here on the 8th floor, we can go to Sky Tower Summit, the 9th floor, meaning this is our first attempt against Rayquaza, which is going to be hard because, of course, Rayquaza Dragon Flying type resists both of our big stab moves at least once, if not multiple times, but the strategy is in place. Critical hits galore. Now, I'm not holding the scope lens on this run. This is my first attempt here. Just want to see how this works. The Screech, which I mentioned very early on in the episode, I relinked it up, meaning that now we get multiple drops. We do a lot of damage. We're dealing 200 points of damage at some point. The Leer Karate Chop there, and we win on our first attempt against the big boss against Rayquaza. What an exciting situation that was. The real question is, as we go through this little meteor situation, how do we do? I guess I'm shouting out Johnstone as well with the how do we do thing. I didn't mean to do that, but thinking back on it, that might be the case. Anyway, the meteor, you guys know how the ending of the story goes if you've seen this. The big thing is, how do we do? Well, you can see the time on your screen right here. We completed it in 4 hours, 35 minutes, 52 seconds. There were some high points, there were some low points. Some of the bosses we were able to beat remarkably easy. Rayquaza obviously comes to mind because that's the most recent, but even going back to Moltres, a boss that I was fully expecting to be extremely complicated for us, it turned out to be really easy. On the other hand, as will be the case going forward in this series, spread moves are going to be terrible, and so moves like Powder Snow, Silver Wind, and other items like that, other moves like that, are going to be things I have to watch out for. Any Pokemon that resist those type of moves are probably going to be easier to work with and easier in the runs than Pokemon like Machop and Treecko in particular. Defensively, not exactly the greatest. I will say, Machop having Focus Energy, critical hit boosting items in general, the Scope Lens that I picked up and used during Groudon, Scope Lens I picked up and did not use versing Rayquaza, it really helped with the critical hits. Focus Energy helps with the critical hits. Karate Chop has boosted critical hit chances, and when you get those defenses down with the Leers and the Screeches, it can really help with that physical damage, which is what will probably be a lot of the strategies going forward, if especially they do have Leer or Screech or some move like that. Now, that's not always the case, right? Other Pokemon start off with different combinations of movesets, right? But it is at least one strategy that I know is successful to deal a lot of damage against later foes. Now, the question of the matter is, how did we feel about this? Well, I can't really rank this against any other starter combination without having done another starter combination. So just because it can stay that way for this 1 week, I'm going to have this combination of Machop and Treecko be S rank because it's the best of all the ones, out of all the ones we've done so far. It's the best one. Yes, it's the only one, but also it's the best one. And so it'll be that way until we have something to compare it to. Now, before we end this episode here, of course, I like to keep the credits on at the end of the specific series episodes and other items like that. But you guys, I need your help with this. I didn't mention this earlier, but I will mention it here. In the comments section of these series, you can leave which starter combination you want to see next. And not the next challenge, because I like to keep a challenge ahead, so not the next episode of this, but the episode afterwards, I will be basing on the highest liked comment, the highest one in the description, not in the description, sorry, in the comment section below. So, which starter combination do you want to see next? The only request I have, it must be a legitimate starter combination. I want this to be a legit run-through, or as legit as you can get, going forward. And trust me, I've done the math, there's like 120, 130 different combinations that you can do legitimately, 130 different starter partner combinations. Now, this doesn't apply in this case, but going forward, if we do, say, Charmander Bulbasaur, another combination is Bulbasaur Charmander, because that's a different way of playing through the game. And there are different strategies involved with that, like Pokemon that use Quick Attack are helpful as allies, not necessarily as beneficial when you're the hero. That's the end of this specific run. Thank you so much for listening, watching, and supporting in any way, shape, or form that you do. Until next time, take care.